Today, the U.S. economy operates at a blistering pace. It is a multi-trillion-dollar machine driven by startups, algorithmic trading, and global tech platforms. Yet for the people living inside that machine, the sheer volume of wealth often feels disconnected from their daily reality. Millions face climbing housing costs and a widening wealth gap. We are taught a very specific version of economic history. It begins in 1776 with the radical idea of economic freedom. And from there, the story is usually pictured like this: a smooth, uninterrupted climb of progress across centuries. But building a system with minimal control guarantees volatility. The real path to modern wealth is a series of brutal crashes, panics, and depressions. The American economy derives its power from a capacity to weaponize its own wreckage, using the debris of one collapse to blueprint the next. For the first 100 years, daily commerce was tied tightly to the soil. Small local markets and farmers dominated the landscape until the late 1800s. The shift away from agriculture required immense physical infrastructure. Millions of tons of raw timber and steel were laid down to create thousands of miles of railroad track, connecting previously isolated cities. People flooded into these new urban centers. The explosion of the steel and oil industries generated massive, rapid wealth, but the financial system managing that growth operated with almost zero oversight. In 1929, that unregulated system broke. The stock market collapsed, wiping out vast fortunes in days and sending terrified crowds into the streets of the financial district. The damage immediately spread from Wall Street to Main Street. Thousands of banks failed, businesses boarded their windows, and millions of men suddenly found themselves standing in blocks-long lines just to get a single meal. The Great Depression proved that a totally unchecked capitalist engine could destroy itself. It forced the government to step in for the first time with massive policies designed to build a floor under a falling economy. Federal intervention brought back basic banking stability and put people back to work on public projects. But those policies only stabilized the baseline. The true engine of recovery arrived entirely by accident, through the demands of a global war. American manufacturing pivoted almost overnight. Assembly lines that previously made cars and consumer goods were rapidly retooled to churn out rows of heavy armored tanks and military supplies. To meet the impossible production quotas, the workforce had to expand. Millions of women entered the industrial workforce, a shift in labor demographics that would continue long after the war ended. When the war ended, that turbocharged industrial capacity didn't disappear, it pivoted back to the consumer. The result was a booming middle class that could suddenly afford detached homes, cars, and a standard of living known as the American dream. In less than 2 decades, the United States emerged from total depression to become the world's primary creditor and manufacturer. Over the next 50 years, that prosperity grew, as did the complexity of the financial sector. The simple banking of the mid-century evolved into a tangled, highly leveraged global web. In 2008, the bill came due. A massive bubble in the housing market burst, leading to a wave of foreclosures that stripped millions of families of their homes. The panic echoed the crash of 1929. Major financial institutions that had stood for a century filed for bankruptcy, and traders watched helplessly as global markets bled out on their screens. Once again, the system had grown too fast, and once again, massive federal intervention was required to stop a total collapse. But just as the country rebuilt through industrial power in the 1940s, it rebuilt the post-2008 economy through technology. Investment flooded into digital infrastructure, moving the financial world from trading floors to vast humming server racks. The wreckage of the 2008 crisis served as the staging ground for a system run on code, where billion-dollar companies can scale in mere months through high-speed innovation. We can now see the clear pattern. This diagram maps the cycles of American economic history, showing how the agricultural era crashed into industry, which collapsed and reformed into wartime manufacturing, which eventually paved the way for our digital present. But while the macro system always recovers, each cycle leaves deeper permanent marks on the population, most visibly in a rapidly expanding gap between the wealthiest individuals and everyone else. The technology boom has created massive capital, but it has done little to solve the climbing costs of healthcare, higher education, and basic shelter for the average worker. We are not standing at the end of history. The digital economy is just the latest peak in the cycle, carrying its own hidden fragilities and building towards its own eventual disruption. The American machine has proven it can survive catastrophic failure and rebuild itself stronger. The question for the decades ahead is whether the next great reinvention can figure out how to rebuild fairly.